So today we're going to be talking about ways to self-assess kind of your compassion satisfaction, your compassion fatigue, levels of burnout, secondary trauma. So we're going to touch on all of those big key points. Just think about trauma stewardship if you're familiar with or not familiar with that term. We'll talk through that, and compassion satisfaction. Um, and talking about our roles as helpers and people who do good work and help other people and sit in other people's suffering, and have to kind of take that on in different ways and things that we can do to help to also have our own fulfilling lives. And then the last one, being able to just think about caring for ourselves in the midst of caring for other people and developing intentional plans to continue to value your own humanity in different ways. So I wanted to start by giving a land acknowledgement and just acknowledging that the areas that we work and play and live and do the things that we do across the state of California is originally the colonized ancestral land of at least 110 indigenous tribes. I just want to take a minute as we start to honor their ancestors and their descendants, the things that they have survived and the contributions of their relatives, past, present, and future, and wanting to just pay my respects and make an acknowledgement as we are all in helping professionals that this is, I think, an under-acknowledged area that I want to make sure that I'm doing my part in honoring and respecting. Self-care, at least in my experience, has become kind of this pop psychology word that people throw out to mean going and getting a pedicure or going to the gym or doing kind of these prescribed things that can often feel like, wow, now I have a whole other list of things to do on top of the list that I think have of things to do. If this has been clearly defined for you in any of the work settings you've had or the trainings you've been to, what that's been like for you, and observations that you have about how supervisors or colleagues or peers model this self-care word. I'm going to get on a soapbox for a minute. I apologize for that. But I opened this talk thinking about colonization and how we live and work on lands that do not belong to us and that were taken from other people. And I think a lot of the things that we're talking about and describing specifically in working in the agencies and places that we work in have a lot of that same colonization history where the things that we're talking about are not often valued from a structural level, from an organizational level, from a team level, and then down to a personal level, and how we learn to internalize these systems and then try to pass on something different to the next generation of the people that we're supervising, knowing like this is not something I was raised into. And we can look at people who are in different areas of our profession, who might be in private practice, who do this really well and have great balance, but aren't doing the things that we're doing to help people who have been marginalized and outcast from our society. And so here are these people that I think suffer the most a lot of times from oppressive forces in our society, and then the people who are supposed to help them also don't always have the resources or the modeling or the support to value our own humanity in those moments. And so that's why it's important to take a pause every once in a while and say, hey, wait, let's just talk about this, because if we don't, and we don't recognize the challenges and we don't recognize the issues or the factors that continue to perpetuate them, they're going to continue on their own. So thank you all for what you shared. I think it's all really important and very helpful, vulnerable statements about how we've all experienced this. And I've noticed the definitions tend to be, that come from kind of the top down, often tend to be vague. They tend to be impersonal, incomplete, and it doesn't give a sense that everyone can kind of find what their own personal needs are. And so that's something I want to talk about today, is how do we identify like okay, there's this thing called self-care. Obviously, I'm supposed to do it. I don't really want to have to like fit it into my schedule because that feels overwhelming. But what is it that I actually need to feel more human and to be a better me who I am in doing this work that I'm doing? So I want to introduce the idea of trauma stewardship. I highly recommend the book, but it talks about this whole idea of kind of being responsible for what we do while also being responsible for who we are as humans. And just to step back a few steps, I kind of first started down this whole path of like looking at these bigger issues, did a lot of volunteer work leading up into grad school, and noticing like international humanitarian aid workers, when you're in an environment with people who have given their lives to working for people who have very little, it's hard in those contexts to say like, oh yes, I'm going to leave right now and go out to dinner and buy myself a nice meal when I'm surrounded by people who have no food. And those ideas of the ways that I was noticing they were in very small ways kind of putting aside their own humanity for the humanity of the people who were around them, because there was this differential in what they had and what they were given and the privileges that they have had. And so, kind of starting from that lens and then getting into the mental health field, going through graduate school, um, going through the academic setting where people tend to run themselves into the ground with the work that they're trying to do, and just noticing the many ways that people as helpers often give up little pieces of their own humanity, their own needs in the service of others. And there's something that's beautiful about that. There's something that can be very life giving about that. And there's something that can often be a loss to us in that and can lead to burnout and senses of being overwhelmed and lacking support and having all kinds of our own mental health needs and issues. Saying all this, I also want to recognize that we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and we're having these conversations in the context that this has gotten a lot different. For some people, it's gotten a lot more complicated. It's gotten a lot more difficult over the last couple of years. Some people, it might have gotten a lot easier. People might have been able to find a work context that they feel works better for them, and they're able to feel more themselves and take care of themselves better. Some people might have come to a breaking point in the last few years and said, okay, now I know I need to prioritize this in different ways. And so that awareness might be there in a different way. But I think it's something important to just acknowledge as we have this conversation. So I put this quote up here. This is from the book called Trauma Stewardship: An Everyday Guide to Caring for Self While Caring for Others. The author of it was is a social worker, and kind of started to notice she had this moment where she was, I believe she was with her family having like one of those mountaintop experiences. She was on a cliff overlooking the sunset, and it was this beautiful moment, and she noticed, and all I could think was, I wonder how many people have jumped off this cliff. And that kind of moment of awareness for her that like, this is not normal, that this is what I'm thinking about when I'm having this beautiful moment, and I'm sure that nobody around me is having the same thought. Kind of started this whole process for her. It's now, even they have a website you can go to. She has some beautiful resources that some of them we'll look at in a little bit. um, but this idea of um, what caregiving takes, the decisions that we make on a daily basis to live our own lives while still continuing to care for others. Um, Thinking of ways that we as people, ways that we can affect change in our organizations and societies, to identify our own experiences as well as the experiences of the people that we work with, noticing the trauma that we've experienced, the trauma that other people and even the planet has experienced, in the ways that those impact ourselves, and thinking about the realities of pain and joy and how we allow both of those things to exist at the same time, and being able to prioritize and value our own growth and healing. And then what that's able to do for our abilities to sit with suffering, to respond to the suffering of others, and to expand the work that we do. Because when we're in a place where we're overwhelmed and we're stressed out, it's hard to be all that we can be for the people who depend on us. So this is one of the infographics on the Trauma Stewardship website. I just want you to take a minute to kind of read around the circle and notice if you've seen any of these things in yourself, in coworkers. You don't have to call anyone out, but like, do you see these things happening in yourselves, in your organizations? Or does this kind of bring up any thoughts for you, just looking at this cycle? I'm actually giving a different talk in a couple of weeks about infant mental health and the importance of play and creativity. But how much we lose as adults, and just like we get so serious and so specific about things, and we need to protect that sense of awe. I want you just really quickly, we'll take just a quick 5 minutes, and I'll let you kind of do the other ones after, but I want you to take a look at this. So take a minute and look over these items. I have filled this out many, many, many times. And I've noticed sometimes my scores look different than other times. There are times when the work that I do is harder than others. There are times when the clients that I'm working with are really, really challenging. And I think it reflects in how I might fill this out. I noticed just today, items 18 and 19, filling those out. My work makes me feel satisfied. Yeah, sometimes it does. I feel worn out because of my work as a helper. Yeah, sometimes I do. And those things can both exist at the same time. And so recognizing for yourself, and it's a part of what we're doing right now. This is a self-assessment. You don't have to turn these into anyone. This is just kind of for you and your own thoughts about yourself and how you're doing. Um, and for yourself to notice kind of what is the impact of the work that you're doing on you right now, because this is a space for you to be human and to have your own humanity valued. We have two other scales that were sent to you, and I'm just going to go over them really briefly. The next one, the stress reaction inventory, is also one that has been sent to you, and it just has a list of different domains of functioning. The reason why I like using this with the professional quality of life scale is it says like, okay, here's these things, but how am I doing across the board? How am I doing cognitively, mentally? How are my emotions? What is the impact on my behaviors? What is the impact on my relationships? What is the impact on my spirit and who I am, and how I can connect to the world around me, to nature, to a sense of awe, to be able to play with kids, to be able to feel at peace, that spiritual piece of who we are as humans. How is the impact on my physical health? So going back to kind of my initial like self-care definition, and people being, oh, why don't you go out and get a pedicure or like go to the gym? Is I think often we think of prioritizing one piece of our humanity and not making space for all of it, and we notice that we're struggling to maintain our sense of awe. Like there's this piece of us that is impacted, but it's not as easy to recognize, or it's not that we're like having health problems or heart palpitations. It's that like, you know what, I care a little bit less about things. And so being able to stop and recognize all the different parts of your humanity, I think can be really important. So the last one that is in there, it's a self-care worksheet. And this is how I like to kind of wrap up the trio of assessments, and just thinking about, if we look at each of these different areas of our functioning, how are we valuing and prioritizing these parts of ourselves? And going through it, it's not like, oh, I'm really winning in this area and I'm totally losing in this other area. It's more like, what are some things that I can do to care for myself spiritually? What are some things that I'm noticing I've really let go in my physical health and I haven't been prioritizing? So just a way to kind of stop and think through what um, what you are doing well, and areas not that you're not doing well in, but areas that you might want to shift your priorities to. Or that if you think, man, if I were to spend 5, 10 minutes a week focusing on this one thing, I think I would feel better because I'm recognizing my comprehensive needs as a person a little bit better. So I encourage you to, after we're done here, fill out those additional assessments and just kind of sit with the meaning that they may hold for you, and also thinking about what you took away from the professional quality of life scale. So then there's this idea of self-compassion. Dr. Kristen Neff has done a lot of work on self-compassion. I put a link to her website right there. It's this idea you may try to change in ways that allow you to be more healthy and happy, but this is done because you care about yourself, not because you are worthless or unacceptable as you are. We're not talking about this because you guys aren't doing a good enough job taking care of yourselves and that's why your work is stressful. We're talking about this because you all have such importance and value, and the work that you do is so important. But we also want to give you the ability to focus on yourself as well. Most importantly, having compassion for yourself means that you honor and accept your humanness. Things won't always go the way that you want them to. You will encounter frustrations, losses will occur, you will make mistakes, bump up against your limitations, fall short of your ideals. This is the human condition, and it's a reality shared by all of us. The more you open your heart up to this reality instead of constantly fighting against it, the more you'll be able to feel compassion for yourself and all of your fellow humans in the experience of life. I'm reading this because obviously she's going to say it a lot better than I think I probably could. I'd encourage you, she has several books on self-compassion that if it's something you're interested in expanding your own practice in, I would direct you towards her website. So the 3 elements of self-compassion that Dr. Neff kind of points out is the idea of self-kindness versus self-judgment. Really trying to notice the times when you are judging yourself, when you're coulda, shoulda, woulda yourself, and spending more time planning for the things that you need to do than doing the things that you want to do. Recognizing common humanity versus kind of feeling isolated in the things that you're experiencing, especially because we experience a lot of difficult stuff in the work that we do. And practicing mindfulness versus over identification. So in the work that we do, it's really easy to connect ourselves with the people that we're working with the problems that we see, with the greater problems in society, and to feel impacted in different ways by all of the things that are happening on all of the different levels that we're involved with. And so spending time acknowledging the reality of those things and being mindful about it, but also not having to take them on. Prioritizing self-compassion, it's a big deal. We want to be whole, well people. We want to be able to model good practices for clients and supervisees. We want to come to work. We want to be able to do the work that we do well and feel better about who we are as people while we do that work. But in the long run, also considering the importance of our own quality of life, our ability to maintain ourselves within this field. I think everyone here in this training has made a choice to do work that is really hard. And we want for everyone to be able to do that effectively for as long as it makes sense for them to do that, to feel balanced, feel human, be able to practice self-awareness and reflection on who we are as people in the work that we do, and the impact that we're able to have in the lives of people. And we're better able to adjust and shift and adapt when things come up, when we are doing better and when we're in a better place. And if the last 2 years is that there's just been so much adjustment and adaptation, I think, that we've all had to deal with. And it's a good time to stop and say, okay, now let's get ourselves back online so that we can do the best that we can for the next thing that comes along. This is another infographic from the Trauma Stewardship website. And just thinking of small things to do to protect yourselves, to work towards self-compassion, to work towards effective work in our field, things that are kind to your own stress response system, things that help you to feel regulated as a person, are going to work wonders for your own brain's capacity to do the work that you're asked to do, but also your ability to just engage and relate with people and feel like you are doing well with what you're doing. I would, again, you can download the PDF from the trauma stewardship website. I have it on my wall over here. Oh, actually, it's right behind my computer. It's over there. So just thinking of ways that you can value and prioritize some of these things for yourselves as you learn for yourself. Again, self-compassion, self-care is a very individualized process. So as you start to go through these assessments maybe and learn more about the areas that you want to prioritize for yourself, this might be able to give you some examples or some ideas. And so the last thing is this self-care wheel. This is just kind of another little way to take all of the stuff from these different assessments and put it into one place. It's a place for you to kind of have a piece of paper where you can write down, this is something I learned about myself today. This is an area I want to value. I'm really noticing the impact on my spiritual health. I'm really noticing the impact on my professional satisfaction. This is one thing that I want to set an intention for in the next week, in the next month, in the next day, to value or prioritize for myself as a way, again, to think about how do we start to take a step back from all of these lessons we've learned and the ways that we're trained to work and the ways that our organizations do or don't value these practices, and say, this is something for myself because I have value and I want to be able to protect that. These are the two books that I referenced in the presentation, as well as the websites where you can find a lot more information just about the two the books that they have, the different resources that they have available. And then want to leave just a few minutes for you guys to ask questions, any other thoughts or reflections from the rest of the things that I've shared today.
It looks like there are a couple questions in the chat. What about the systemic problems within our institutions and organizations that cause burnout? Personally, I love the work I do with clients. Mostly I feel burnt out by the systemic issues that make it harder for me to provide the services my clients need.
Thank you. That's a really good point and kind of ties back into kind of the legacy of colonization and of the ways that our organizations, our society has been set up. One thing I didn't acknowledge, which I apologize for and will do now, is that this also looks very different among different people groups, among different minority groups. And I know from working with colleagues and trainees and my own observations that the lessons that people get within our professional settings based on what they look like and how they go through the world is very different and have a lot of legacies that tie way back into the colonization and the oppressive history of our country and our world at large. And so I think it's something I would encourage you to, if it feels safe, to bring those things up with your supervisors to start to talk about it. But I love this idea, and I apologize, I cannot remember off the top of my head right now the author of it, but she's brilliant African-American writer and talks about the idea of rest as resistance, as a part of being revolutionary and taking a stand by taking care of yourself. And so also the idea of finding ways to kind of have a silent protest by engaging in some of these practices for yourself and setting some of those boundaries to begin to call out some of those practices within your setting. I don't know about your setting specifically, but I would encourage you to find allies, find people to talk to, and find people to that you feel comfortable starting to value these things for yourself alongside. So you have kind of a cohort of people who can start a movement within your organization. But also, it sounds like you guys have a really great network here. And so I would rely on the resources that are available to you and start making those connections.
Any advice for self-care practices when experiencing staff shortage?
Yes. I think that is a very widely known thing right now. I think our clinic here is down 4 clinicians now, and we're not even a very big place. And so I feel like instead of, I don't know that I have advice necessarily, other than it's okay to value these things and to set boundaries and to do what you can do, recognizing that the workload is higher, the burden is higher, and if it burns you out and you're not capable of doing it, then the staff shortage gets even bigger. So kind of respecting the role that you have to play and knowing that if you're not meeting everybody's needs in those times, talking with your supervisors and saying, like, this is what I'm actually capable of doing, or I'm not capable of doing this work. There's a very clear line there, and that's what burnout is, right? And so exploring some of these things for yourself, identifying, doing some of these assessments, identifying the things that you think might be helpful to you, and then advocating for yourself for those things, and talking with supervisors about what your limits could be and what you're capable of doing, and knowing that there's only so much that one person can do, that 3 people can do. And when we're down people, some things aren't going to get done. And so trying to figure out how do I do, not trying to figure out how do I do everything, but how do I figure out what is it that I can do that's going to have the biggest impact when we're understaffed.